Stop, pause your thoughts, still your hands, and listen with your whole heart, because this moment has been appointed for you. I am calling your attention now, not to frighten you, but to awaken you, for your breakthrough starts today, and delay is no longer an option. You have stood at the edge of change longer than you realize, sensing something stirring but not yet named. This is that moment. What is being revealed now carries weight, direction, and consequence. Lean in, because what you hear next is meant to realign your life, not someday, but now. Stop. Do not scroll past this moment. Do not let your mind wander. Do not tell yourself this is for later, because this is the moment I have been waiting for you to arrive at. I am speaking to you now, not because you are strong, not because you are ready, but because the time has come and heaven will not be silent any longer. You have been moving through your days as if they were all the same, carrying weight you were never meant to carry, telling yourself you will deal with it tomorrow, someday, when things slow down. But hear me clearly. Today is not ordinary, and you are not here by accident. Before you took your first breath, I marked this very moment. I knew the weariness in your bones, the quiet sighs you release when no one is watching, the questions you ask late at night when the world goes still. I have seen you endure, survive, adapt, but survival was never my promise to you. I did not create you merely to get by. I created you to break through. You have been waiting for something to change, hoping for a sign that tells you it is finally safe to believe again, safe to expect again, safe to hope without feeling foolish. And now I tell you plainly, your breakthrough starts today. Not because everything around you has suddenly aligned, but because I have decided this is the day I interrupt your routine and call you to attention. You may feel unprepared, unsure, even resistant, but I am not asking for perfection. I am asking for your attention. I am asking you to listen with your heart, not just your ears, because what I am about to do will require you to see differently. This moment is a threshold, and you are standing on it even if you do not yet realize it. You have mistaken silence for absence, delay for rejection, and struggle for failure. But I have been closer than you think, watching every step, counting every tear, measuring every moment of endurance you did not think mattered. I know how long you have waited. I know how many times you told yourself not to expect too much so you would not be disappointed again. I know how often you have lowered your hopes just to protect your heart. But protection is not the same as faith, and caution is not the same as trust. I am calling you higher now, not with condemnation, not with anger, but with authority and love. I am telling you that this season you are in is not the end of your story. It is the doorway. Do not rush past this moment. Let it settle. Let it confront you. Let it awaken something you thought had gone quiet inside you. Because when I speak, it is not to fill space, it is to shift destiny. I am not here to entertain you or comfort you into complacency. I am here to realign you with what I have already ordained. You are not late. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. You are standing at the beginning of something you have prayed for, even when you did not have the words to pray it clearly. And if you will stay with me, if you will listen instead of rushing ahead, you will begin to see that this moment was never random. It was appointed, and it is unfolding now, even as I speak to you. Pay attention now, because the interruption you are feeling is not an accident. It is the signal you have been asking for without knowing how to recognize it. You have been waiting for clarity to come wrapped in certainty, for direction to arrive without requiring courage, for assurance that would remove every risk before you took the next step. But listen closely. Breakthrough never announces itself with comfort. It announces itself with disruption. The reason this moment feels unsettling is because it is shaking you awake. You told yourself you needed a sign, something unmistakable, something that would silence the doubt and justify your hope, and here you are, being stopped mid-stride, confronted by words that reach places you thought were sealed off. This is not coincidence. This is the moment where waiting ends and awareness begins. You have trained yourself to move quickly past moments like this, to rationalize them, to say, "That was interesting," and then return to the familiar rhythm of delay. But I am pressing you now because delay has become too comfortable, and comfort has been quietly draining your expectation. You have learned how to function without anticipation, how to pray without expecting an answer soon, how to hope with a protective distance so disappointment hurts less. Yet distance has never been the language of transformation. I am not calling you to be entertained by inspiration. I am calling you to respond to invitation. The reason this feels personal is because it is. I am speaking directly into the pattern of postponement that has kept you circling the same questions, the same fears, the same almost decisions for far too long. You have asked, why hasn't anything changed? Without realizing how often you postponed obedience while waiting for certainty. You told yourself you were being wise, when in truth you were being cautious in ways that quietly resisted growth. This message is the line drawn across that pattern. It is not here to accuse you, but to awaken you. The sign you wanted was never meant to remove responsibility. It was meant to restore courage. And courage does not come when everything makes sense. It comes when you recognize that staying where you are is costing you more than moving forward ever could. Notice how your heart is responding right now. Notice the stirring, the discomfort, the sense that something is being named that you have avoided naming yourself. That is awareness breaking through numbness. That is truth finding a door you left slightly open. You are not being pressured. You are being invited. But invitation requires response, and response requires honesty. You must be willing to admit that part of you has grown tired of hoping, tired of starting, tired of believing that this time could be different. I am not offended by that fatigue. I acknowledge it. Yet I refuse to let it define you. You are not someone who was meant to settle into resignation. You are someone who was meant to rise into expectancy again. So do not dismiss this moment. Do not minimize it. Do not tell yourself you will come back to it later. Later has kept you stationary long enough. Right now is where clarity begins, not because everything hath been explained, but because you have been interrupted at the precise moment you needed to be. And as this awareness settles in, as resistance loosens its grip, you will begin to sense that this is not just a sign you received, it is a threshold you are being asked to cross, one honest step at a time. Let me say what you rarely hear spoken aloud. I see the weight you carry when no one is applauding your strength. I see the exhaustion you hide behind responsibility, the questions you bury beneath productivity, the disappointment you learn to manage instead of confront. You have become skilled at appearing steady while your inner world strains under the pressure of unspoken prayers and unresolved longing. You told yourself that enduring quietly was maturity, that carrying everything alone was proof of resilience. But there is a difference between strength and suppression, and you have been surviving by silence for too long. This is where that pattern begins to loosen. You have whispered questions you were afraid to say boldly. You have asked whether your effort still matters, whether your patience has meaning, whether the promises you once believed in so fiercely were meant for someone else after all. And when no immediate answers came, you adjusted not by healing, but by lowering expectation. You learned how to keep moving while feeling unseen, how to keep giving while feeling empty, how to keep hoping just enough to function but not enough to risk heartbreak again. I know this version of you. I have watched you navigate disappointment with dignity, even when it was costing you joy. But endurance alone was never the destination. It was only the bridge. Hear this carefully. Your struggle has not been ignored, and your quiet faith has not been wasted. Every tear you dismissed as insignificant carried information. Every sigh you thought was weakness was actually communication. You are not overlooked because you did not collapse publicly. You are not forgotten because you learned to cope privately. What you have carried in silence has been shaping you, but it was never meant to imprison you. Survival mode may have kept you functional, but it has also kept you guarded, and guarded hearts rarely recognize new beginnings when they arrive. You may have wondered why relief did not come sooner, why answers felt delayed, why the wait seemed to linger even after you prayed sincerely. But preparation often looks like pressure before it looks like progress. What you interpreted as stagnation was endurance being built, discernment being sharpened, depth being formed where shallow optimism could not survive. You were being strengthened in ways that could not be rushed. Because what is ahead of you requires more than enthusiasm, it requires resilience that has already faced disappointment and refused to quit entirely. Yet do not misunderstand this moment. I am not asking you to carry this weight indefinitely. I am acknowledging it so you no longer have to pretend it does not exist. Recognition is the beginning of release. When what you have endured is finally named, it loses its power to define you. You were never meant to simply manage pain. You were meant to move beyond it. And now that you have been seen, now that the silence has been broken, you can begin to understand that the strength you developed was not to keep you trapped, it was to prepare you for what comes next. Stay here with me. Do not rush past this acknowledgement. The journey forward requires honesty, and honesty begins with allowing yourself to be seen not as you present yourself to others, but as you truly are. And as that truth settles, you will feel the weight begin to shift, not all at once, but enough for you to realize that endurance was never the end of your story. It was simply what carried you to this moment. Listen carefully, because this is where your understanding begins to shift. What you called delay was never absence, and what you labeled as nothing happening was actually something being built beneath the surface. You measured progress by visible movement, by doors opening quickly, by outcomes that could be explained and celebrated. But growth does not always announce itself with noise, and preparation rarely feels productive while it is happening. You assumed that waiting meant you were falling behind, that time passing without resolution meant something had been wrong. Yet all along, you were being strengthened in ways that could not be rushed, because the version of you that first asked for the breakthrough was not yet ready to carry it. You wanted change without friction, answers without tension, promise without pressure. But depth is never formed in ease. It is formed in endurance. Every season where you felt stretched thin, every moment where patience felt heavier than hope, was shaping capacity within you. You were learning how to stand without applause, how to remain steady without reassurance, how to keep moving even when motivation faded. These were not punishments. They were preparations. You were being taught discernment so you would not mistake distraction for opportunity. You were being given resilience so you would not collapse under the weight of what you once thought you wanted. You wondered why it took so long, why clarity seemed delayed, why momentum stalled just when you thought things were about to change. But haste would have handed you something you could not sustain. Preparation, though uncomfortable, ensures longevity. You were being trained to recognize your own strength, to confront your own patterns, to identify the places where fear still dictated your decisions. Had things moved faster, those areas would have remained hidden, and hidden fractures always surface later under pressure. What you endured earlier spared you from collapse later. Notice how your perspective has shifted compared to who you were before this season began. You think more deeply now. You question more honestly. You are less impressed by shortcuts and more aware of consequences. That did not happen accidentally. Time refined you. Waiting clarified you. The questions that once frustrated you have now matured your thinking. You no longer chase every possibility. You sense alignment. You no longer rush into every open door. You listen first. This is what preparation produces, not delay, but discernment. So release the belief that time was wasted. Nothing that shaped you was lost. The strength you gained quietly will soon be required openly. The patience you learned unwillingly will soon become stability. And the endurance you thought was merely survival will soon reveal itself as the foundation that allows you to stand confidently when things begin to move quickly. Preparation often feels like stagnation when you are inside it, but clarity comes when you look back and realize how much has changed within you. Stay present here. Do not rush ahead mentally to the outcome. The value of this moment is understanding that you were never abandoned in the waiting, you were being readied. And as that realization settles, it will lead you naturally into the next truth you must face, because preparation does not only strengthen you, it also reveals what within you still resists transformation. Now we come to the place you have avoided, not because you are weak, but because honesty requires courage you were not always ready to use. Before what you desire can be released, What has been quietly resisting within you must be acknowledged. You assumed the obstacles were external circumstances, people, timing, opposition beyond your control. Yet the greatest resistance hath been internal, subtle, familiar, and often justified. Fear dressed itself as caution. Doubt disguised itself as realism. Unhealed wounds presented themselves as wisdom. And because they felt reasonable, you allowed them to stay. You told yourself you were being careful when you were actually protecting yourself from disappointment. You said you were being patient when you were really postponing vulnerability. You convinced yourself that lowering expectations was maturity, when it was actually self-defense. These patterns did not make you a failure, they made you human. But if left unexamined, they would quietly block everything you have been preparing to receive. Breakthrough cannot coexist with internal agreements that say, "I will try, but I will not fully trust." Resistance does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers logical excuses that keep you from stepping forward. Look closely at what tightens inside you when hope rises. Notice the hesitation when possibility feels real. That is not intuition, it is fear remembering pain. You learn to brace yourself because disappointment once caught you unprepared. You learned to manage expectations because hope once hurt. Those responses kept you functional, but they also kept you guarded. And guarded hearts rarely move freely. They move carefully, calculating risk instead of responding to invitation. This is the resistance that must be named, not to shame you but to free you. You cannot transform what you refuse to acknowledge. Pretending you are unaffected does not make you healed. It only makes the wound quieter. And quiet wounds still influence decisions. They shape how much you risk, how deeply you trust, how fully you believe. What you call discernment may sometimes be fear wearing spiritual language. What you call wisdom may sometimes be avoidance refined by experience. These patterns formed for understandable reasons, but they are not meant to lead you forward. This moment is not about condemnation. It is about clarity. When resistance is revealed, it loses authority. When fear is named, it no longer dictates direction. You do not need to force change. You need to allow truth to surface. And truth, once acknowledged, creates space for transformation. Preparation brought you here, but honesty will carry you through. Do not rush to fix anything yet. Simply recognize what has been operating quietly beneath your decisions. Awareness is the first movement of freedom. And as you allow that awareness to deepen, you will begin to sense that what once resisted is now loosening its grip, not because you fought it, but because you finally saw it clearly. Pay attention to the tension you feel right now, because it is exposing a truth you have quietly negotiated with for too long. You have learned how to be comfortable in a place that was only meant to be temporary. You adapted. You adjusted your expectations. You found ways to manage disappointment without letting it fully break you. And while that resilience kept you functioning, it also slowly convinced you that survival was enough. But hear this clearly: comfort is not covenant. Just because something feels familiar does not mean it is faithful to who you are becoming. You were not shaped merely to endure, you were shaped to expand. And expansion always disrupts comfort. You have called this season normal, but normal has been slowly numbing your desire. You wake up, move through routines, fulfill responsibilities, and tell yourself that this is just how life is now. Yet beneath that acceptance is a quiet ache, a sense that something essential has been postponed. You feel it when you imagine what could be possible and immediately talk yourself out of it. You feel it when opportunity stirs and you instinctively calculate risk instead of listening for resonance. This is not peace, it is familiarity masquerading as stability. And familiarity, when left unchallenged, becomes the enemy of growth. I am not calling you reckless, I am calling you honest. You have confused comfort with safety, but safety that limits you is not safety at all, it is containment. You learned how to cope where you were because coping felt easier than confronting the fear of change. You learned how to make peace with less because wanting more once felt dangerous. But wanting more is not ingratitude. It is recognition that there is more life available to you than what you have settled into. God speaks of alignment, a movement, a purpose unfolding. Comfort asks only that you stay still. This is the moment where you must distinguish between what soothes you and what shapes you. Comfort quiets urgency. Covenant awakens responsibility. Comfort says, at least this works. Covenant asks, is this who you are meant to be? You have stayed in places, patterns, and perspectives not because they were right, but because they were predictable. Predictability gave you a sense of control. But control is not the same as trust, and control will never carry you into transformation. Growth requires surrender of the illusion that staying small keeps you safe. Notice how your heart responds when you imagine stepping beyond what you know. There is fear, yes, but there is also energy. There is resistance, but there is also longing. That longing is not a flaw, it is a signal. It is reminding you that you were not designed to remain where you are. Comfort dulls that signal over time, convincing you that longing is unrealistic. But longing is often the language of alignment calling you forward. You are being invited out of survival mode, not into chaos but into promise. Promise requires trust. Promise requires movement. Promise requires that you stop confusing stillness with faithfulness. This is not about abandoning responsibility. It is about refusing to let responsibility become a cage. You can honor where you have been without living there forever. And as you begin to loosen your grip on comfort, you will start to recognize that the next step forward is not asking you to be fearless, it is asking you to be willing. Listen closely now, because this is where quiet patterns lose their authority. There are agreements you never consciously chose, yet they have been shaping your decisions for years. Some were inherited from voices you trusted. Some formed in moments of pain. Some grew out of survival strategies that once protected you. But agreements made in fear do not age well, and what once helped you cope may now be keeping you contained. You did not start every pattern you continue, but continuation still carries responsibility. Awareness brings choice, and choice is where change begins. You absorb expectations that were never meant to define you. You believe statements about who you are, what you can handle, what you should expect, because they were repeated often enough to sound like truth. You learned to agree with limitations because they felt realistic. You aligned yourself with narratives that explained disappointment instead of challenging it. These agreements did not arrive dramatically. They settled quietly, shaping how you interpret opportunity, how you respond to uncertainty, how deeply you trust yourself to move forward. And because they were familiar, you stopped questioning them. Some agreements sound wise on the surface. Don't get your hopes up. Be realistic. This is just how things are. They present themselves as protection, but they function as restriction. Other agreements sound spiritual. Maybe it's not meant for you. You should be content with where you are. Contentment, when misunderstood, becomes an excuse to avoid growth. Acceptance, when misapplied, becomes surrender to stagnation. These ideas may have helped you make sense of disappointment, but they were never meant to govern your future. Breaking old agreements does not mean rejecting your past. It means recognizing that the version of you who made those agreements was responding to circumstances that no longer define you. You are not required to remain loyal to conclusions formed under pressure. You are allowed to outgrow explanations that once made pain tolerable. Growth demands reevaluation. It asks you to revisit what you assumed was settled and decide whether it still serves who you are becoming. Notice how certain thoughts automatically surface when you consider change. They won't work. You've tried before. You know how this ends. These are not predictions. They are echoes. They repeat because they were once useful, not because they are true now. When you agree with them without questioning, you reinforce their authority. When you pause and examine them, you weaken their hold. Resistance often lives in the automatic, unchallenged response. This is not about forcing optimism or denying reality. It is about alignment. You cannot move forward while agreeing with narratives that keep you anchored to past outcomes. Breaking agreements is an internal act before it becomes an external one. It begins when you choose to listen differently, when you allow new language to interrupt old conclusions, when you decide that past experience will inform you, not imprison you. Stay with this awareness. Do not rush to replace old agreements yet. First, notice them. Recognition loosens their grip. And as you become more conscious of what has been shaping you, you will find that choice returns to places where it quietly disappeared. A return of choice is not small. It is the beginning of freedom unfolding from the inside out. Pause right here, because what you are feeling is the edge of a necessary shift. The breakthrough you desire cannot be carried by the mindset you have tolerated. You have asked for change while holding on to familiar ways of thinking, hoping the outcome could transform without the inner framework being challenged. But release follows renewal, not the other way around. You have been trying to step into something new while interpreting it through old assumptions, old fears, old definitions of what is possible for you. The tension you feel is not resistance from the outside. It is the strain of expansion pressing against a framework that must be renewed to hold what is coming. You learned how to think in environments that taught you caution before courage, logic before trust, self-protection before openness. Those ways of thinking were not wrong for where you were, they were adaptive. But adaptation becomes limitation when it remains long after the environment has changed. You are no longer in the season where those mental habits serve you, yet they still shape your expectations. You look at opportunity and immediately scan for risk. You imagine progress and instantly calculate cost. You anticipate disappointment before allowing yourself to experience hope. This is not realism, it is conditioning. And conditioning, when left unexamined, quietly caps your capacity. Renewal does not mean forcing positive thoughts or denying struggle. It means allowing your perspective to be reshaped by truth instead of habit. It requires you to notice how often your first response is doubt instead of curiosity, defense instead of openness, control instead of trust. These responses happen quickly, almost automatically, because repetition has made them feel safe. But safety that limits growth eventually becomes confinement. You cannot step into a larger life with a smaller lens. The container must change before the content can be poured in. You have been trying to receive new answers with an old posture, waiting for certainty before movement, clarity before commitment, reassurance before risk. But growth reverses that order. Movement clarifies. Commitment strengthens. Risk reveals trust. Renewal happens when you allow yourself to think differently before you feel ready, to act with intention even while uncertainty remains. This does not make you reckless. It makes you responsive. There is a difference between impulsive action and aligned movement, and alignment begins in the mind. Notice how often you interpret discomfort as warning instead of invitation. Stretching feels like danger only when your framework is rigid. Renewed mindset recognizes stretching as evidence of capacity increasing. You are not being asked to abandon discernment. You are being asked to refine it. Discernment that is rooted in fear always points backward. Discernment rooted in alignment points forward, even when the path is not fully visible. This is why renewal must come before release. Without it, what you receive will either overwhelm you or be mishandled. With it, what once felt intimidating becomes manageable, even meaningful. Renewal does not happen all at once. It unfolds through attention, reflection, and willingness. Each time you question an automatic assumption, you create space. Each time you choose openness over defensiveness, you widen that space. And in that widening, you are preparing yourself not just to receive something new, but to sustain it. Stay here in this awareness. Do not rush past it. The shift in how you see will determine how far you can go. And as your framework begins to loosen and reshape, you will find yourself ready for the next truth, one that releases you from the exhausting belief that you must fix yourself before you are worthy of change. Listen deeply now, because this is where relief replaces striving. You have been trying to fix yourself when what is needed is surrender. You treated growth like a project, healing like a checklist, transformation like something you could accomplish through effort alone. You analyzed your patterns, corrected your behavior, disciplined your thoughts, yet still felt the weight of unfinished change. That exhaustion you carry is not because you are failing. it is because you have been carrying responsibility that was never meant to be yours alone. Self-fixing keeps you busy. Surrender sets you free. You believe that if you could just be more disciplined, more consistent, more self-aware, everything would finally align. And while effort has its place, it was never meant to replace trust. Effort without surrender eventually turns inward, becoming pressure instead of progress. You start measuring your worth by your ability to improve, your value by how well you manage your flaws. That mindset quietly turns growth into a burden. You begin to fear mistakes because they feel like proof you are not changing fast enough. This is not transformation. It is performance disguised as progress. Surrender does not mean passivity. It means releasing the illusion of control over outcomes and timelines. It means acknowledging that some shifts happen not through force, but through permission. There are places in you that do not respond to pressure, they respond to safety. There are wounds that cannot be argued into healing. They soften when they are allowed to be seen without judgment. When you stop trying to fix yourself, you create room for deeper change to occur, not because you gave up, but because you let go. Notice how often your inner dialogue sounds like correction instead of compassion. You tell yourself to do better, try harder, be stronger. But strength that never rests becomes brittle. Surrender allows you to lay down the constant evaluation and simply be present. Presence is where awareness deepens. Awareness is where transformation begins. You cannot heal what you are constantly trying to outrun. You cannot renew what you are always criticizing. Surrender also requires trust that you are not broken beyond repair. Trust that growth does not require self-rejection. Trust that you are allowed to be unfinished. You have been afraid that if you stop striving, nothing will happen. But striving has already shown you its limits. Surrender does not stall progress. It redirects it. It shifts the source of change from pressure to alignment, from control to cooperation, from fear-driven improvement to truth-driven growth. This is the moment where you stop carrying the belief that you must earn transformation. You were never asked to become someone else before moving forward. You were asked to become honest. Honest about your limits. Honest about your fatigue. Honest about your need for support beyond your own strength. When you release the need to fix yourself, you allow change to reach deeper than behavior, it reaches identity. Stay with this release. Feel the space it creates. In that space, something quieter but stronger begins to work within you, reshaping not just what you do, but how you relate to yourself. And as that shift settles, you will find that what once felt heavy begins to feel possible, not because you forced it, but because you finally allowed it. Stay with me, because what I am about to say will challenge what you have been holding on to. You cannot carry yesterday into tomorrow and still expect to receive something new. Your hands are full not just with responsibilities, but with memories, losses, explanations, and attachments that once made sense but now weigh more than they protect. You have been gripping what you lost, replaying what went wrong, revisiting what should have been different, as if understanding the past more deeply might finally release you from it. But holding on, even to understanding, still occupies space. And what is coming next requires empty hands. You told yourself that remembering was wisdom, that reviewing was learning, that holding on was honoring what mattered. Yet there is a difference between honoring and clinging. Clinging keeps you facing backward, measuring every new possibility against old outcomes. It turns reflection into rehearsal and grief into identity. You did not realize how much energy you were spending maintaining connection to what has already ended. You thought letting go meant forgetting, but forgetting was never the request. Release is the invitation, not denial, not dismissal, but a willingness to stop carrying what no longer needs to be carried. You have been afraid that if you let go, what you lost would lose its meaning. But meaning does not disappear when weight is released. It clarifies. Lust does not need to be held tightly to be honored. In fact, when you loosen your grip, you finally allow yourself to step forward without betrayal of your past. You can acknowledge what shaped you without allowing it to dictate you. You can remember without reliving. You can learn without lingering. Empty hands do not mean empty heart, they mean readiness. Notice how often you hesitate when something new approaches. You scan it for familiarity, for reassurance that it will not repeat old pain. That hesitation is not caution alone. It is attachment protecting itself. You learn to hold on tightly because release once felt like failure. But holding on indefinitely turns survival into stagnation. You are not being asked to abandon wisdom. You are being asked to trust that wisdom has already been integrated. What you needed to learn, you learned. What you needed to survive, you survived. Now comes movement. Letting go does not happen all at once. It begins with willingness, the willingness to stop revisiting the same conclusions, the willingness to stop explaining your pain to yourself over and over again, the willingness to stop defining yourself by what did not work. Each small release creates space. Each moment of surrender lightens the load. And as your hands begin to open, you will notice something unexpected. Your posture changes. You stand differently when you are no longer bracing against the past. You look forward more easily when your arms are not wrapped around what has already passed. This is not about loss. It is about alignment. What is ahead of you is not a replacement, it is a continuation that requires freedom of movement. You cannot receive while gripping. You cannot advance while anchoring yourself to what is behind you. Empty hands are not a sign of lack. They are a sign of trust. And as you begin to loosen your grip, you will sense that something you feared losing has already transformed into something you are ready to outgrow. Stay here in this openness. Do not rush to fill the space. Space is necessary. Space is preparation. And in this clearing, you are now ready to understand a truth that changes everything about timing, urgency, and hope, because what you thought was too late is actually arriving right on time. Listen carefully, because this is where the lie of too late finally loses its power over you. The moment you thought you missed is not behind you, it is unfolding now. You have carried the quiet belief that opportunities expire, that timing closes doors permanently, that once a season passes, it never returns. You replayed choices, wondering what would have happened if you had known then what you know now. That regret has whispered that you arrived after the window closed, after the momentum faded, after the chance disappeared. But that voice was never truth, it was fear interpreting time without understanding purpose. You assumed timing was linear, that everything meaningful had a narrow window, and you simply failed to step through it. But timing is not about speed, it is about readiness. You were not late, you were being shaped. You were not delayed, you were being prepared. The urgency you feel now is not panic. It is alignment finally catching up with awareness. When readiness meets opportunity, it feels sudden, even if it has been forming quietly for a long time. What you are experiencing now is not last-minute desperation. It is precision. You believe that because you stumbled, hesitated, or doubted, you disqualified yourself. But growth includes hesitation. Wisdom often arrives through experience, not before it. You were learning discernment, resilience, and self-awareness, tools you would not have possessed had things moved faster. If the door had opened earlier, you might have walked through it unprepared, mistaking excitement for sustainability. Timing that feels late often protects you from outcomes you were not yet equipped to manage. Notice how different you are now compared to who you were when you first hoped for this change. You see more clearly. You question more honestly. You are less driven by impulse and more guided by alignment. A difference matters. The moment you thought you missed required this version of you, not the earlier one. Readiness is invisible until it arrives, and when it does, it reframes everything you thought went wrong. What felt like delay now reveals itself as design. This is why despair never had the final word. Even when you told yourself to stop expecting, something inside you kept listening. Even when you assumed it was over, you remained open enough to be interrupted. That openness is why you are here now. That willingness, even in fatigue, is why the moment has found you again, not as repetition, but as progression. You are not starting over. You are continuing with greater clarity. Do not underestimate the power of now. Now carries all the learning, all the endurance, all the refinement of what came before. Now is not weaker because it came later. It is stronger because it carries context. The urgency you feel is not pressure, it is recognition. Recognition that this is the moment you once hoped would come. Recognition that what you feared was lost has been preserved until you were ready to receive it fully. Stay present in this realization. Let relief replace regret. Let possibility replace self-blame. You did not miss your moment, you grew into it. And as that truth settles, it will naturally lead you into the next shift, where you no longer face what comes alone, because the battle you have been fighting by yourself is about to change in ways you did not expect. Take a breath and listen, because this is where the weight begins to shift in a way you did not know was possible. You have been fighting battles you were never meant to fight by yourself. You told yourself independence was strength, that carrying everything alone proved resilience, that asking for help or even expecting it made you vulnerable in ways you could not afford. So you learned to strategize, to brace, to endure. You turned life into a series of quiet confrontations, facing uncertainty with clenched teeth and practiced composure. But strength that isolates eventually exhausts, and endurance without support slowly convinces you that struggle is permanent. It is not. You have been negotiating with pressure as if it were your responsibility to manage everything that comes your way. You assumed that if you just tried harder, planned better, stayed alert, you could outlast whatever stood against you. Yet vigilance has kept your nervous system alert and your heart guarded. You became skilled at anticipating impact instead of expecting relief. That posture kept you prepared for disappointment, but it also kept you from recognizing support when it arrived quietly. You were so focused on holding the line that you forgot you were allowed to be backed, defended, reinforced. This is where the fight changes. Not because opposition disappears, but because your position does. You are no longer standing at the front line alone, measuring your strength against forces that feel larger than you. The moment you recognize that you do not have to carry every outcome, something loosens. The battle stops being about your capacity and starts being about alignment. When alignment shifts, resistance loses leverage. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable, not because you suddenly became stronger, but because the weight was redistributed. Notice how your body responds when you imagine not having to solve everything immediately. There is relief there, even if it feels unfamiliar. Relief does not mean avoidance. It means trust. Trust that you are supported by something beyond your own vigilance. Trust that you are allowed to step out of constant defense mode. When you stop bracing for impact, you free energy that can now be used for clarity, creativity, and forward movement. Fighting alone narrows your focus to survival. Supported movement widens your vision to possibility. You may still feel resistance here. Old habits do not dissolve instantly. You have practiced self-reliance for a long time, and releasing it feels risky. But independence is not the same as isolation. You are not being asked to become passive. You are being invited to become receptive. There is strength in allowing reinforcement. There is wisdom in recognizing when a battle is not yours to manage alone. This does not diminish your agency. It strengthens it by placing it within a larger framework of support. As this truth settles, you will notice a subtle but powerful shift. Urgency softens into steadiness. Anxiety gives way to discernment. You stop reacting to pressure and start responding to direction. The fight no longer defines you. Movement does. You begin to realize that many of the battles you thought were personal were actually transitional signals that something was changing, and you were meant to move, not brace. Stay with this realization. Let it reframe how you approach what comes next. You do not have to push through every obstacle with sheer force. There is another way of advancing, one that feels less like combat and more like alignment. And as you step into that alignment, a deeper layer of restoration begins, because the struggle was not only external. Some of the hardest battles were internal, and now those, too, are about to be addressed. Now listen with your whole attention, because this is where the conversation turns inward with precision and care. Some of what has held you back did not break you loudly, it broke you quietly. There were no dramatic moments that demanded immediate attention, no obvious wounds that others rushed to acknowledge. Instead, there were subtle fractures formed through rejection, disappointment, betrayal, and unmet expectation. You adjusted to them. You adapted. You told yourself it was not that bad. And because you could still function, you assumed you were fine. But functioning is not the same as healing. Quiet wounds shape behavior in subtle ways. They influence how close you allow people to get, how much you trust positive outcomes, how quickly you withdraw when something feels uncertain. You learn to stay composed instead of expressive, guarded instead of open. You learn to expect less so you would not be caught off guard again. These adjustments made sense at the time. They helped you remain stable. But over time, stability turned into limitation. You stopped reaching for what once felt possible, not because you stopped believing, but because believing felt risky. You did not recognize this as injury because it did not incapacitate you. You kept moving, kept producing, kept showing up. But beneath that competence was a quiet shrinking, a narrowing of expectation, a softening of desire, a hesitancy to fully invest. Healing is required not because you failed, but because you adapted too well to circumstances that were never meant to define you. Adaptation kept you alive. Healing will help you live fully. This is not about reopening pain for the sake of reliving it. It is about acknowledging what shaped you so it no longer controls you. When wounds remain unaddressed, they become filters through which you interpret everything new. Opportunity looks suspicious. Affection feels vindictive. Success feels temporary. You brace for loss even in moments of gain. These are not character flaws. They are protective responses. But protection that never relaxes becomes a barrier to connection, growth, and joy. Healing begins with recognition. Recognition does not demand explanation or justification. It simply allows truth to surface without judgment. You are allowed to name what hurt you, even if others minimized it. You are allowed to acknowledge impact, even if the moment has passed. Time does not erase unprocessed experience. It only buries it deeper. Bringing it into awareness loosens its grip. What you can name, you can integrate. What you integrate no longer dictates your reactions unconsciously. As this healing begins, you may notice emotional responses you thought you had outgrown. Do not interpret this as regression. Sensitivity returning is not weakness, it is capacity expanding. Numbness is efficient, but it is limited. Feeling again means you are becoming available for connection, creativity, and growth at a deeper level. Emotional freedom is not a side effect of breakthrough. It is part of it. You cannot fully step into what is ahead while parts of you remain guarded by old pain. Stay present with this process. Healing does not demand urgency. It requires honesty and patience. Each acknowledgement softens resistance. Each moment of compassion toward yourself restores energy that was locked in defense. And as those quiet fractures mend, you will find that your ability to trust yourself, others, and the unfolding path begins to return. With that return comes strength of a different kind, one that does not brace against life but engages with it openly, prepared for what comes next. Pay attention to the steadiness returning to you now, because this is where healing begins to transform into strength, not the loud kind that demands recognition, but the quiet kind that holds under pressure. As what broke you quietly begins to mend, you are not simply becoming softer. You are becoming sturdier. Healing does not weaken you. It recalibrates you. It removes the constant drain of guardedness and redirects that energy into discernment, focus, and resolve. You are discovering that strength does not always announce itself as force, it often arrives as clarity. You may notice that your reactions are changing. Situations that once unsettled you no longer hijack your attention. Conversations that once triggered defensiveness now invite reflection. This is not detachment. It is grounding. You are no longer operating from unhealed reflexes. You are responding from awareness. Awareness creates choice, and choice creates authority over how you move forward. This authority is essential for what comes next, because the path ahead will require you to recognize what aligns with you and what does not without over-explaining or second-guessing yourself. As strength settles in, discipline begins to feel less like restriction and more like protection. You start to see that boundaries are not walls, they are gates. They allow what nourishes you to enter while keeping what drains you at a distance. You are learning to listen to signals within you: fatigue, resistance, enthusiasm, peace, and to treat them as information rather than obstacles. This internal attunement sharpens your discernment. Discernment is not suspicion. It is sensitivity refined by experience. It allows you to move forward without being naive and to trust without being reckless. You may also notice an invitation to deepen your listening. Not everything requires an immediate response. Not every opportunity requires pursuit. Not every challenge requires confrontation. Strength knows when to act and when to wait. It recognizes that timing is part of wisdom. You are being trained to pause without losing momentum, to reflect without stalling, to commit without rushing. This balance is not accidental, it is preparation. What is ahead of you will move quickly at times, and without this grounding, speed would feel overwhelming. With it, speed becomes exhilarating. Do not be surprised if your standards begin to shift. You may find yourself less tolerant of chaos disguised as excitement, less willing to negotiate your values for temporary gain, less inclined to prove yourself to anyone. This is not pride, it is alignment. When you know who you are becoming, you stop auditioning for places that cannot hold you. You start choosing environments, relationships, and commitments that reinforce growth rather than compete with it. Strength simplifying decisions by clarifying priorities. There may still be moments of doubt. Strength does not eliminate uncertainty, it contextualizes it. You no longer interpret uncertainty as a warning sign to retreat, but as a natural companion to expansion. Growth always carries unknowns. The difference now is that you are not approaching them from fragility. You are grounded enough to explore without losing yourself. This grounding is the result of the healing you allowed and the awareness you practiced. It is the foundation for the next phase, where the stretching you once feared becomes not only manageable, but necessary. Stay aware of this shift. Name it. Honor it. Strength grows through recognition. And as you settle into this steadiness, you will find yourself ready for the next invitation, one that asks you to expand beyond what you currently know, to stretch beyond what feels familiar, and to trust that the discomfort ahead is not a threat, but evidence of growth already underway. Now feel the stretch, do not recoil from it, because what you are experiencing is not strain meant to break you, but expansion meant to prepare you. Growth announces itself through discomfort before it reveals itself as confidence. You have reached the edges of what once contained you, and that container is no longer sufficient. This is why restlessness has replaced complacency, why familiar routines feel tight, why old explanations no longer satisfy. Stretching is the language of capacity increasing. It does not mean something is wrong. It means something is ready to change. You may be tempted to interpret discomfort as a sign to stop, to return to what is known and predictable. That impulse is understandable. The familiar offers immediate relief. But relief is not the same as alignment. Relief soothes the present moment. Alignment sustains the future. When you pull back from the stretch, you momentarily escape discomfort, but you also delay expansion. When you lean into it with awareness, you allow your capacity to grow. Capacity is what enables you to hold more responsibility, more influence, more impact without losing balance. Stretching challenges identity. You are asked to see yourself differently, to release definitions that once felt accurate but are now incomplete. You may hear an internal voice questioning whether you are capable, whether you deserve the space you are stepping into, whether you are ready. These questions do not mean you are unprepared. They mean you are transitioning. Every expansion asks you to negotiate self-perception. The self that carried you here must now make room for who you are becoming. That negotiation feels awkward because it requires letting go of certainty before the new identity feels fully formed. Notice how your habits are being questioned. What once felt efficient may now feel limiting. What once energized you may now feel insufficient. This is not failure, it is evolution. Growth demands refinement. It asks you to reassess where you invest time, attention, and energy. Stretching reveals inefficiencies not to shame you, but to free resources for what matters more now. When priorities shift, friction appears. That friction is instructive. It highlights where adjustments are needed so that expansion does not lead to exhaustion. You might also feel a tension between excitement and fear. That combination is a hallmark of growth. Excitement points to alignment, fear points to the unknown. They can coexist without canceling each other out. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is movement that acknowledges fear without obeying it. Stretching teaches you how to hold both, how to remain grounded while reaching forward. This balance is crucial. Without it, you would either retreat prematurely or rush unprepared. With it, you move steadily, integrating growth as it unfolds. Do not measure progress solely by comfort. Comfort often follows growth. It rarely precedes it. Measure progress by awareness, by willingness, by the quality of your engagement with what challenges you. Each time you choose curiosity over avoidance, presence over distraction, alignment over relief, you reinforce expansion. Stretching becomes less intimidating as you recognize it as a signal rather than a threat. Stay with the stretch. Breathe into it. Allow it to reshape you gradually. What feels unfamiliar now will become the new normal once your capacity catches up. And as it does, you will realize that the discomfort you once feared was simply the threshold to a wider field of possibility, one you are already stepping into, even as you listen. Listen now, because what feels like displacement is actually direction. You are being repositioned. The subtle unease you have felt, the sense that familiar environments no longer fit, that certain conversations drain you, that old roles feel restrictive, is not confusion. It is recalibration. You are not losing ground. You are being moved to ground that can sustain what is growing within you. Repositioning rarely announces itself with clarity at first. It begins as restlessness, as misalignment, as a quiet knowing that staying where you are will cost you more than moving forward ever could. You may have interpreted this shift as instability, worrying that change means risk, that leaving what you know will undo what you have built. But stability that limits expansion eventually becomes stagnation. You are not being uprooted to be unsettled. You are being relocated to be resourced. Favor does not find you by accident. It finds you when alignment places you where your gifts, timing, and environment intersect. Remaining in spaces that no longer recognize or require your growth keeps you invisible to opportunities designed for who you are becoming. Notice how your tolerance has changed. You are less willing to negotiate your values for acceptance. You feel friction in environments where you once blended in easily. This is not arrogance. It is discernment maturing. Repositioning refines your sense of belonging. It teaches you the difference between familiarity and fit. Familiarity offers comfort. Fit offers contribution. You are being guided toward spaces where your presence adds value rather than merely fills a seat. That guidance may feel lonely at first because it often requires leaving before arrival becomes obvious. You might feel pressure to explain your decisions, to justify why you are stepping back from certain commitments or distancing from particular dynamics. Resist the urge to over-explain. Your positioning is an internal alignment before it becomes an external move. You are allowed to follow resonance without providing a defense. When alignment is real, explanation becomes unnecessary. What fits will recognize you. What does not will require persuasion. Let the distinction guide you. As you reposition, your expectations must also shift. You are not moving to replicate the past in a new place. You are moving to engage differently. Old strategies may not apply. Old definitions of success may feel insufficient. This is intentional. Repositioning invites you to operate from discernment rather than habit, from intention rather than momentum. You are being asked to listen more carefully, to choose more deliberately, to respond rather than react. This attentiveness opens doors that haste would miss. There may be moments when the transition feels quiet, even anticlimactic. Do not mistake subtlety for insignificance. Some of the most consequential shifts happen without spectacle, a conversation that ends, an invitation you decline, a direction you stop pursuing. Each of these choices narrows the path toward alignment. As the path narrows, clarity increases. As clarity increases, movement becomes easier. Stay attentive to where energy returns. Notice where curiosity replaces obligation, where effort feels purposeful rather than draining. These are indicators of alignment. Favor does not always appear as ease. It often appears as momentum that feels earned rather than forced. You will know you are being repositioned correctly when you no longer have to convince yourself to show up. Presence becomes natural. Contribution becomes obvious. Growth becomes sustainable. Remain patient in this movement. Repositioning is not about speed. It is about placement. And placement determines what can find you next. As you settle into this new alignment, you will begin to recognize doors that once seemed closed now appearing differently, not locked, not barred, but waiting. Waiting not for perfection, but for readiness expressed through obedience. And that recognition will lead you directly into the next truth you must face. Pay close attention now, because this is where perception changes everything. The door you thought was closed was never locked, it was waiting. You assumed silence meant rejection, that lack of immediate access meant permanent denial. You interpreted resistance as finality, delay as dismissal. But doors are not always closed because they are inaccessible. Sometimes they are closed because the timing requires alignment. What you thought was exclusion was actually invitation postponed until readiness arrived. You knocked before with hope but without clarity, with desire but without discernment. You approached expecting outcome without preparation, access without adjustment. When the door did not open, you concluded it was not meant for you. That conclusion protected you from disappointment, but it also limited your vision. Doors that matter most often require more than enthusiasm. They require posture, patience, and precision. You were not being kept out, you were being refined. Notice how differently you stand now compared to before. You are not knocking out of desperation or curiosity alone. You are approaching with awareness of who you are, what you carry, and what you are willing to contribute. This shift matters. Doors respond to readiness more than insistence. Readiness is expressed through obedience, the quiet, consistent alignment with what you know to be true even when no immediate reward appears. Obedience does not shout. It shows up. It prepares quietly while waiting faithfully. You may still feel hesitant, remembering past attempts that ended without resolution. That memory is understandable. But memory should inform, not immobilize. The version of you who approached before is not the version approaching now. You have been reshaped by healing, strengthened by discernment, and repositioned by alignment. The door recognizes this difference even if you are still learning to trust it yourself. Timing responds to maturity. Access responds to alignment. Do not confuse waiting with inactivity. While you waited, you learned restraint. You learned to listen. You learned to release what no longer served you. These lessons were not delays. They were keys being formed. Keys do not look impressive until they meet the lock they were designed for. When they do, access feels sudden, even though preparation took time. What appears like an overnight opening is often the result of quiet obedience sustained over a long season. As you approach now, release the need to force outcome. Force bruises opportunity. Alignment invites it. Stand with openness rather than urgency. Curiosity rather than demand. Confidence rather than fear. Doors open most easily when you stop pushing and start aligning. You will recognize the right moment not by absence of fear, but by presence of clarity. Clarity steadies your hand. It allows you to turn the handle without hesitation. If the door opens, step through with humility and intention. If it remains closed a moment longer, do not retreat in discouragement. Waiting at the threshold is still progress. Thresholds refine posture. They teach patience without passivity. Presence without pressure. You are closer than you think, not because you tried harder, but because you listened longer. Stay here with this awareness. The door is not a test of worth. It is a response to readiness. And readiness is not about having all the answers, it is about being aligned enough to move forward without them. As that truth settles, you will find yourself stepping not into uncertainty, but into a new way of walking, one marked by confidence that does not need to rush, and obedience that knows when the moment has finally arrived. Stop and notice the way you are standing now, because something fundamental has shifted. You are no longer stepping forward with desperation, but with recognition. Recognition of who you are, of what you carry, of the ground beneath your feet. Before, movement felt rushed, driven by the fear of missing out or falling behind. You advanced with tension in your shoulders and urgency in your breath, trying to outrun doubt by speed alone. But now, your pace has changed. You are not slower, you are steadier. And steadiness is the mark of confidence that has learned to listen. You are walking forward differently because you are seeing yourself differently. You no longer measure your worth by outcomes alone or define your value by immediate results. You understand now that movement aligned with truth carries its own authority. That authority shows up as calm resolve, as clarity in decision-making, as an ability to say yes without panic and no without guilt. You are not proving yourself anymore, you are expressing yourself. This distinction matters because proof-seeking drains energy, while expression multiplies it. As you walk now, fear still tries to speak, but it no longer sits in the center. Fear has become a signal rather than a commander. When it arises, you acknowledge it without obeying it. You ask what it is pointing to, not what it is demanding. This curiosity transforms fear from an obstacle into information. You are learning to interpret inner responses instead of being ruled by them. That skill alone changes how you move through the world. You are no longer reacting, you are responding. Notice how your decisions feel less cluttered. You are not weighing every choice against old disappointments or imagined failures. You are listening for resonance. Does this align with what you know to be true about yourself now? That question simplifies movement. It does not guarantees, but it guarantees coherence. Coherence brings peace even in complexity. You may not have all the answers, but you have enough clarity to take the next step without fragmenting yourself in the process. This way of walking changes how others experience you as well. You are less defensive, less eager to convince, less entangled in external validation. Your presence becomes grounded. People sense when someone is internally aligned. It shows up as confidence without arrogance, openness without naivety, strength without force. You are not trying to be impressive. You are being authentic. Authenticity has gravity. It draws the right connections and repels what does not fit without effort. You may notice moments where old habits attempt to resurface, overthinking, second-guessing, retreating into familiar caution. When they do, treat them as echoes, not commands. They are reminders of where you have been, not instructions for where you are going. Growth does not erase the past, it contextualizes it. You can acknowledge the echo and continue forward without stopping to argue with it. This ability to keep moving despite internal noise is a sign of maturity, not indifference. Walking forward differently also means redefining success. Success is no longer just arrival. It is integrity maintained along the way. It is alignment sustained through pressure. It is growth that does not cost you your peace. You are learning that acceleration without alignment leads to burnout, but alignment naturally produces momentum. When your inner and outer movements match, progress feels less like struggle and more like unfolding. Stay attentive to this new posture, or Daggett would have clinging to it. Confidence deepens through practice. Each aligned step reinforces the next. You are not who you were when this journey began, and you are not yet finished becoming. But the way you walk now, grounded, aware, responsive, signals that something irreversible has begun. And as you continue forward in this posture, you will begin to see that your journey is no longer just about you alone. What you are becoming carries impact beyond your own life, and that realization is about to expand your sense of purpose in ways you did not anticipate. Listen closely here, because this realization widens the horizon of everything you have been walking toward. What is unfolding in you was never meant to end with you. You assume this journey was personal, and it is, but it is not private. The strength you are developing, the clarity you are gaining, the freedom you are learning to live in will ripple outward in ways you cannot yet fully see. Breakthroughs are rarely solitary events. They become signals, permissions, and pathways for others who are watching quietly from the edges of your life. You may not think of yourself as influential. You may underestimate how your choices speak, how your posture teaches, how your willingness to grow creates space for others to believe they can grow too. Influence does not require a platform. It requires presence. People notice when someone stops shrinking. They feel it when someone refuses to stay bound by old narratives. Your movement forward gives language to longings others have not yet articulated. It shows what is possible without needing to explain it. You have endured things that others are still navigating. You have questioned patterns that others still assume are fixed. You have allowed healing where others are still coping. These experiences have shaped you not just for your own freedom, but for empathy. Empathy turns experience into guidance. Guidance offered without superiority becomes invitation. Your story, lived honestly, becomes a bridge rather than a pedestal. Others will cross it not because you told them to, but because you walked it first. Do not feel pressure to perform this impact. Whether distorts purpose. Simply remain aligned. Alignment naturally emits clarity. When you speak from lived understanding rather than theory, your words carry weight without force. When you listen with patience rather than judgment, your presence creates safety. Safety allows others to explore change without fear. This is how transformation spreads, not through instruction alone, but through example embodied over time. You may notice that people begin to ask different questions around you. It may seek perspective, share doubts, or quietly mirror your choices. Do not rush to lead. Leadership that emerges organically is sustained by trust. Trust grows when you remain consistent, grounded, and honest about your own process. You are not meant to be perfect. You are meant to be real. Realness invites connection. Connection multiplies impact. At times, this realization may feel heavy. You may wonder if you are ready to carry influence. Remember this: you are not responsible for controlling outcomes in others. You are responsible for staying aligned in yourself. When you do, the right impact unfolds naturally. You do not have to convince, convert, or correct. You simply continue walking with integrity. Integrity is persuasive without being aggressive. This outward ripple also reframes hardship. Challenges no longer feel meaningless when you recognize that what you learn will later become language for someone else's confusion, hope for someone else's discouragement, courage for someone else's hesitation. This does not romanticize difficulty, it contextualizes it. Meaning does not remove pain, but it transforms endurance into contribution. Contribution deepens purpose. Stay open to this widening awareness. Let it humble you without shrinking you. You are not called to carry others on your back, but you are called to walk in a way that leaves a visible path. As you do, you will find that your breakthrough continues to unfold not just as a moment, but as a movement that reaches beyond you, shaping lives quietly and steadily as you keep moving forward. Mark this moment in your awareness, because years from now you will look back and recognize this as the quiet turning point, the day something subtle yet irreversible shifted inside you. Not because everything changed at once, not because circumstances suddenly aligned, but because you did. Before now, you were enduring life with a sense of waiting, as if something important had not yet arrived. You kept moving, kept functioning, kept hoping carefully, but part of you stayed braced, uncertain whether momentum would ever truly return. This is the moment where that posture loosens. This is where faith stops being theoretical and becomes embodied. You will remember this season not for its drama, but for its clarity. Clarity is rarely loud. It settles. It anchors. It replaces frantic questioning with quiet resolve. You are beginning to realize that hope does not need to shout to be real. It only needs permission to rise. And once it rises, it reorders everything: how you interpret setbacks, how you approach decisions, how you speak to yourself in moments of uncertainty. You are no longer waiting for permission to believe. Belief has already begun to move through you. Notice how your inner dialogue is changing. Where fear once narrated the future, curiosity now asks better questions. Where discouragement once predicted outcomes, awareness now pauses and listens. This shift is not accidental. It is the result of everything you have allowed: healing, release, renewal, alignment. Each choice compounded quietly, leading you here. Breakthroughs rarely arrive as explosions, they arrive as accumulations. Small truths embraced consistently become large transformations recognized suddenly. You may still face challenges after this moment. Do not misunderstand this turning point as immunity from difficulty. What changes is not the absence of obstacles, but your relationship to them. You stop interpreting resistance as confirmation of failure. You stop personalizing delay as rejection. You begin to see challenges as information signals guiding refinement rather than verdicts on worth. This perspective alone preserves energy that was previously wasted on self-doubt. Energy preserved becomes focus. Hottest becomes mamayo. This is also the moment where self-trust returns. Not the reckless kind, but the grounded kind that knows how to pause without panic and act without haste. You trust yourself to listen. You trust yourself to adjust. You trust yourself to recover if things do not unfold perfectly. That trust did not appear magically. It was built through endurance, reflection, and the willingness to stay present even when answers were slow. Self-trust is the fruit of integrity practiced over time. As you continue forward, you will notice that the weight of what-if questions diminishes. You are no longer haunted by alternate timelines or imagined failures. The past loosens its grip because the present feels solid. When the present is inhabited fully, regret loses relevance. You become more interested in what is unfolding than in what might have been. This orientation frees creativity, curiosity, and courage, qualities that were always present but previously constrained by fear of disappointment. This turning point also reshapes how you view time. You stop feeling late. You stop rushing to catch up. You understand now that your pace is appropriate for your path. Comparison loses power when alignment is clear. You are no longer trying to replicate someone else's timeline. You are honoring your own. That honor creates peace. Peace does not slow progress. It stabilizes it. Stable progress sustains momentum long after excitement fades. Remember this moment not as an ending, but as an inflection. Inflection points change direction without spectacle. They alter trajectory. From here, even ordinary days carry new meaning because they are no longer placeholders, they are participants in growth. You are no longer waiting for life to begin. Life is already responding to the way you are showing up. And as that response continues to unfold, it will draw you naturally into a deeper rhythm, one that understands that sustaining breakthrough requires more than a moment. It requires closeness, attentiveness, and daily alignment with what you have begun. Now listen with intention, because this is where sustainability becomes essential. Momentum is fragile without intimacy. What you have stepped into cannot be maintained by willpower alone. Breakthroughs ignite quickly, but they endure only when rooted in closeness to awareness, to truth, to the source of what has been unfolding within you. Distance dulls discernment. Proximity sharpens it. Staying close is not about intensity. It is about consistency. It is about returning again and again to what grounds you when distractions multiply. You may be tempted to rely on the energy of recent clarity, to ride the surge of motivation, and assume it will carry you indefinitely. Motivation fades. Rhythm remains. Rhythm is built through small, deliberate practices of attention, checking in rather than checking out, listening rather than rushing, choosing alignment over convenience. These practices are not dramatic, but they are powerful. They keep you oriented when noise increases and options expand. Staying close means noticing when you are drifting before distance becomes disconnection. Drift happens quietly through busyness, through distraction, through subtle compromises that seem harmless at first. You skip reflection. You postpone rest. You ignore signals of fatigue. None of these are failures, but unchecked they accumulate into distance. Distance does not announce itself with crisis. It shows up as numbness, as impatience, as a sense that something feels off but you cannot name it. Closeness restores sensitivity. Sensitivity restores direction. This closeness also protects humility. As movement accelerates and impact widens, it becomes easy to mistake progress for arrival. But arrival is not the goal, alignment is. Humility keeps you teachable. Teachability keeps you adaptable. Adaptability keeps you growing. Growth sustained over time outpaces bursts of brilliance followed by burnout. You are learning to value depth over display, integration over impression. These values preserve your inner life while your outer life expands. Staying close requires boundaries. Not everything deserves your attention. Not every invitation deserves your yes. Discernment sharpens when you honor limits. Limits are not restrictions. They are structures that support longevity. When you protect time for reflection, you preserve clarity. When you protect energy for what matters, you preserve purpose. This protection is not selfish. It is responsible. You cannot offer what you do not replenish. You will notice that closeness also deepens gratitude. Gratitude anchors you in the present rather than projecting fulfillment into the future. It allows you to appreciate progress without rushing past it. Appreciation slows anxiety. Anxiety clouds judgment. Clear judgment sustains momentum. These connections matter. They form a feedback loop that either strengthens or weakens what you are building. Staying close keeps the loop healthy. Do not romanticize constant intensity. Closeness thrives in ordinary moments, walking, breathing, pausing, listening. It shows up when you choose presence over productivity for a moment, when you ask better questions instead of demanding faster answers, when you allow silence to inform you rather than rushing to fill it. These moments recalibrate you. They return you to center. As you continue, remember that breakthroughs are not destinations you reach and leave behind. They are ways of relating to life that must be practiced daily. Staying close ensures that what began as a breakthrough becomes a way of being steady, grounded, responsive. This way of being will carry you forward, not just through the next season, but through every unfolding season that follows. And as you remain close, you will discover that what you thought was a peak was actually a passage, one leading into an even wider unfolding that is still ahead. Listen carefully, because this truth reshapes how you understand everything that has unfolded so far. What you have experienced is not the culmination, it is the commencement. You may feel relief, clarity, even a sense of arrival, but do not mistake stability for completion. Stability is the platform from which purpose expands. What you have stepped into is not the finish line. It is the foundation. Foundations are quiet, often overlooked, but they determine how high and how far something can grow. You are standing on one now. You might be tempted to rest in what feels resolved, to enjoy the calm, and assume the work is done. Rest is necessary, but settling is not the same as resting. Rest replenishes vision. Settling reduces it. The difference is subtle but decisive. Rest says, I am pausing to integrate. Settling says, this is enough. I will not stretch again. You were never shaped for the second posture. You were shaped to keep unfolding, to allow purpose to reveal itself in layers, each one building on the last. Notice how new questions are already forming within you. They are not anxious questions. They are curious ones. They ask not, will I survive? But what can I contribute? Not what if I fail? But what is being asked of me now? These questions signal readiness. They indicate that your identity has stabilized enough to explore impact without losing itself. This is where purpose becomes practical. Not abstract ideals, but lived expression. Not distant calling, but daily alignment. You are entering a season where intention matters more than intensity. Intensity can ignite action, but intention sustains erection. You will be invited into opportunities that look good but feel misaligned. You will be asked to choose depth over speed, integrity over applause, substance over spectacle. These choices will not always be obvious to others, but they will be obvious to you if you remain attentive. Attentiveness is the skill you have been cultivating all along, even when you did not realize it. It is the compass that keeps you oriented as possibilities multiply. You may also discover a new relationship with authority, not power over others, but authority within yourself. Authority to decide without excessive explanation. Authority to decline without guilt. Authority to commit without fear. This internal authority is quiet but firm. It does not demand recognition. It commands respect through consistency. As you exercise it, you will find that your life organizes itself around clarity rather than chaos. What belongs will stay. What did not will fall away without force. This beginning will test your patience in new ways. Growth at this stage is less about dramatic leaps and more about faithful continuity. You will be asked to show up when progress feels incremental, when validation is sparse, when impact is subtle. This is where many lose momentum, not because they lack ability, but because they mistake quiet progress for stagnation. Do not make that mistake. Quiet progress compounds. It builds trust, skill, and influence over time. It creates depth that sudden success cannot replicate. Remember that beginnings require protection. Protect your focus. Protect your energy. Protect your values. Not by withdrawing from the world, but by engaging it selectively. Discernment becomes increasingly important as options expand. You cannot carry everything forward. You must choose what aligns. Choosing is not loss. It is precision. Precision directs growth where it can flourish. Let this understanding settle. You are not restarting, recovering, or catching up. You are continuing with clarity. This continuation is dynamic, not static. It will invite you to keep learning, keep refining, keep listening. That invitation is not a burden. It is a privilege. It means your story is still unfolding, your capacity still increasing, your purpose still revealing itself in ways you could not have anticipated earlier. Stay open to that unfolding. Stay grounded in what you know. Stay curious about what you do not yet see. This is only the beginning, not because what came before was small, but because it was necessary. And as you step forward from this foundation, you will find yourself ready for the final truth that anchors everything you have heard. The moment of action is not approaching, it has arrived. Stop hesitating and feel the weight of this now, because this is the point where insight must become movement. Rise. Tomorrow. Not when conditions feel perfect. Now. The moment you have been preparing for is not ahead of you, it is under your feet. Waiting longer will not clarify it further. Or thinking will not strengthen it. Action, grounded in alignment, is what seals what has been forming within you. This is not a call to rush. It is a call to respond. You have gathered understanding, released what constrained you, healed what weakened you, and aligned with what matters. These were not abstract exercises. They were preparations for motion. Motion gives meaning to insight. Without movement, clarity fades into contemplation. With movement, clarity becomes livid truth. You do not need to see the entire path. You need to take the step that is already clear. That step carries momentum within it. Rising does not mean abandoning caution. It means refusing paralysis. It means allowing yourself to be seen where you once hid, to speak where you once stayed silent, to choose where you once deferred. Rising is internal before it is external. It begins when you stop negotiating with fear and start honoring alignment. Fear will still speak, it always does, but it no longer decides. Decision now flows from coherence, not from avoidance. As you rise, expect resistance not as punishment, but as confirmation. Resistance meets movement because movement disrupts inertia. Do not interpret resistance as a signal to stop. Interpret it as feedback. Ask what it reveals, not what it threatens. Resistance refines strategy. It sharpens focus. It teaches resilience without hardening your heart. You are capable of engaging resistance without becoming reactive because you are no longer fighting for identity. You are acting from it. This moment also asks you to trust the accumulation of small choices you have made. You did not arrive here by chance. Each reflection, each release, each honest pause contributed to readiness. Trust that readiness. Trust your ability to adjust as you go. Trust that missteps will teach rather than define you. Trust that forward motion, even when imperfect, carries more wisdom than endless preparation. Rising will feel different than you imagined. It may not come with applause or immediate confirmation. It may feel ordinary at first, just a conversation, a decision, a boundary, a commitment. Do not underestimate ordinary actions aligned with purpose. They are the building blocks of extraordinary change. Consistency outperforms intensity over time. Show up again tomorrow with the same integrity you show up with today. That is how breakthroughs become lives, not moments. As you move, remember what anchors you. Return to closeness when noise increases. Return to awareness when distraction tempts. Return to alignment when options confuse. These returns keep you steady without stalling you. They allow you to move forward without losing center. Centered movement is sustainable. Sustainable movement changes trajectories. This is your moment, not because everything is resolved, but because enough is aligned. Alignment does not eliminate uncertainty. It renders it navigable. You are no longer asking whether you can begin. You are being asked whether you will continue. Continuation is the real test of breakthrough. And you are ready for it, not because you feel fearless, but because you are willing. So rise now. Step into the day in front of you with intention. Speak the truth that has been forming. Choose the path that resonates. Release the need for guarantees. This moment belongs to you not as a reward, but as a responsibility you are capable of carrying. Your breakthrough does not start tomorrow. It is alive now, moving with you, unfolding through every step you take from here. Amen.